Hello, good afternoon, good evening, or good morning from the World Health Organization headquarters in Geneva. My name is Alexandra Kuzmanovic, and today I'm pleased to be joined by Dr. Kate O'Brien, WHO Director for Immunization, Vaccines, and Biologicals, and Dr. Alejandro Cravioto, who is a professor at Medical University in Mexico City and who is the chair of WHO Strategic Advisory Group of Experts on Immunization. As we already done a series of these interviews when the new COVID vaccine has been granted emergency use listing, today we are here for the same reason, because we have one more vaccine granted the listing, and that's Janssen vaccine. So we invite you all to ask your questions. If you're watching us on Twitter, please use the hashtag AskWHO. If you're watching us on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube, please ask your questions via comment section. Good afternoon, Kate. Good morning, Alejandro. Thank you for your time once again.
Thank you very much.
There's obviously COVID vaccines are the hot topic of 2021, and I think our viewers are eager to see you and ask their questions. But before they start coming in, Kate, as I mentioned in the introduction, there is a new vaccine that's been granted the emergency use listing by WHO, Janssen vaccine, and this is the first vaccine that requires only one dose to reach its full efficacy. So can you please tell us more about this vaccine?
Yeah, so this is a one-dose vaccine. It was tested in clinical trials as the other vaccines that WHO has listed for emergency use and that SAGE has recommended for use. So we've looked at the clinical trials. This is a vaccine that has really substantial efficacy, like the other vaccines that we've looked at already, against disease, including severe disease and hospitalization, which is really the kind of disease that we're most interested in preventing with the limited doses that are available around the world already. So this is an exciting new vaccine because of this one dose regimen that it provides.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you so much. The vaccine was granted emergency use last week, and as regular procedure after that, the Strategic Advisory Group of Experts on Immunization that Alejandro is chairing has met earlier this week to provide recommendations to countries on how best to use this vaccine. So, Alejandro, would you please walk through our viewers on what are the recommendations that you come up with?
Thank you, Alex. First of all, the real work is done by our working group that meets regularly 3 times a week to go over all the information regarding these vaccines before they come to stage as recommendations for us to make. So we'd like to thank really all the experts in the working group for the hard work that they do to get us to this stage. The vaccine, as Kate said, has enough efficacy and safety for us to recommend it for use of people above years of age without any upper age limit. It is good for people who are older, which is something very good. It also has the benefit of being on 2 things. One is called the halal strain. That means it doesn't have any animal products in it. And the other, it doesn't have any fetal tissue in it, which were 2 things that came up as questions before, and which we would like to stress that neither of these 2 things are in the vaccine. The idea is then to have a one-dose vaccination, and that can be given to anybody above 18, including pregnant women if they are at risk of being severely diseased, if they catch the SARS-CoV virus. We feel that the evidence coming out of another vaccine that Janssen has with the same type of adeno-26 platform gives enough evidence after the use of that vaccine in Africa to control the Ebola outbreaks to show that it is safe to use in pregnant women if they are at risk. And the same can be said for women who are breastfeeding their babies and need to be vaccinated because they're in the higher risk groups, that they can also have access to this vaccine. Both of these things, of course, under medical supervision or medical advice. We also feel that the vaccine should be given first to the groups that are mostly affected by the pandemic, and those are the groups that are really in the front line of work or in a more difficult situation to be able to get infected and perhaps go and have issues of severity and death. In the sense of travelers, we still do not recommend any of the COVID-19 vaccines for that. We feel it's too premature and there's not enough supply now even to cover the basic high-risk groups in all countries. So we're not recommending that travelers should be vaccinated for the moment. I think those would be the basic things. We have very little evidence that this vaccine works in people who are HIV positive or are immunosuppressed, but the evidence shows that the vaccine is safe, and we will do studies to prove whether the vaccine can also be safely used in those groups. I would leave it there in case of, unless Kate would like to add something that I didn't mention.
Kate, anything to supplement?
Yeah, I just want to, on this point of vaccines for the purpose of traveling, I think as Alejandro said, we just want to emphasize that the prioritization is for groups who are at most risk of disease to get vaccinated. So health workers, people who are in older age groups, people who have underlying medical conditions that would put them at risk of serious disease or death. And that traveling in and of itself is not a priority group. If you happen to be a person who's in a priority group, we would recommend that you get your vaccine immediately as soon as it's available to you. But travelers as a group is not prioritized. And so I just wanted to make that point clear.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Alejandro. Are there any groups that should not receive this vaccine?
Not that we have found. No, they're not. The groups that need to be, as I said, pregnant women, women who are breastfeeding, who should be doing this under medical supervision. But we don't feel that there are any groups in particular that should not receive this vaccine.
Thank you, Alejandro. And are there any adverse effects that this vaccine can cause that we are aware of?
Like all vaccines, all of them that we know so far have an adverse effect. They can cause pain where the injection is given. They can give a bit of fever. They can make you feel a bit down. Those are things that the company has shown in their clinical trials. There are no adverse that would be considered as severe, at least clinical trials. But like all the other vaccines, we need to see what happens when they're actually rolled out and given to millions of people. And in that sense, the surveillance of these adverse effects, wherever the vaccines are given, is one of the most important things that we recommend that every country has in place so that there are no issues about it. As we have seen, the follow-up of these adverse effects is fundamental for us to understand how the vaccine actually works when it's given to a huge amount of the population. Like all the other vaccines, during the clinical trials, there were a number of things that came up, but none of them were different to what was seen in the group that did not receive the vaccine, what we call the placebo group. So there's something that would be high here as happened if you take this vaccine.
Thank you so much, Alejandro. Here is the question coming from Mariela, watching us on LinkedIn. Besides the fact that this is a one-dose vaccine, which are the other main differences between Janssen vaccine and other ones that are currently approved?
So maybe I can take that. And this question, it sounds like is coming from someone who's living in the U.S. There are additional vaccines that are being used beyond the ones that are used in the United States. All of the vaccines are using a similar idea, and the idea is to provide to the body through the vaccine a very tiny part of the virus that causes COVID. So the tiny part that is provided is either the instructions to make the tiny part of the virus, or it is a tiny part of the virus itself. So both the J&J vaccine and the Pfizer vaccine, as well as the Moderna vaccine, along with the AstraZeneca vaccine, they all use a strategy of providing to the body the instructions for making this, tiny part of the virus that then trains your immune system to respond to that tiny part. And if you have exposure to the real virus that actually causes disease, your body already has fighters in your immune system to recognize the incoming virus and to destroy it immediately. So the difference between the Johnson & Johnson product and the Moderna and the Pfizer product is what kind of instructions are being provided. The Moderna and Pfizer product gives the mRNA, and it's encapsulated in a little fat particle so that the mRNA can be delivered to cells in your body, whereas the Johnson & Johnson product is using a virus, a non-harmful virus, as the vehicle to provide to the body the instructions for making this tiny part of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. And it's really this spike protein that you've heard so much about that's on the outside of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. That's the part of the virus that the immune system recognizes. And so we want to have that tiny bit of the spike protein given to the body so that your immune system can be trained to recognize that part of the virus if you were to actually be exposed and become infected with the real SARS-CoV-2 virus. So that's the big difference between the two.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kate. Alejandro, you mentioned that this vaccine is for 18 years old and above. So our viewers are asking, and other vaccines that have been approved so far are for adults to say, are there any vaccines in the pipeline for children?
They're currently being tested. In fact, there was some news that Moderna has started a trial looking at their vaccine for people from 12 years and above, and then they will go down to infants. I think all the companies are in the process of doing that. For the present time, the only one that goes down to 16 years of age is the Pfizer vaccine. But we don't have any further information, and we have to understand that children are not half adults or a piece of an adult. They do require studies in which we can see how the vaccines actually work in them, especially the little ones. So in that sense, all the studies are ongoing. And the benefit we have here is that we have shown through the time that we have had the problem with the pandemic that the children, especially the younger ones, are not as affected as the adults. And if they are infected, they have much less symptomatology. They have a less symptoms. So in that sense, we feel that they are protected of the response to the infection until we have a defined product that can be used in them. Why is it essential that we vaccinate our children? Because they're the future. And that's something that will need to be done to control the pandemic in the long run. And also because we want to vaccinate our teachers and our children so that we can reopen our schools, which are essential for the reopening of the economy in all our countries.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Alejandro. Here is a question coming from our Facebook viewer. What if you get pregnant while waiting for your second dose of a COVID vaccine? Is it safe? So this obviously doesn't refer to Janssen vaccine, but to the other ones.
Alejandro, do you want me to take that one? Yeah. So just to reiterate the recommendations on this vaccine, but also the other vaccines that we've already reviewed, there is nothing about these vaccines that makes us worry that there might be something harmful in taking the vaccine to a pregnant woman. So these are not vaccines that are replicating viral vaccines. There's no reason to believe that there would be any harmful effect. By the same token, we are always completely transparent and clear about what evidence we actually have that is the basis for the recommendations that we make. And none of the clinical trials included pregnant women in the clinical trials. So we don't actually have any specific evidence to reinforce our expectation that these vaccines have no risk to the pregnancy. So that's why the recommendation is that if you're recommended to get vaccination because you're in a high-risk group or you've otherwise reached the phase of rollout of the vaccine, it's really a discussion with your provider about the benefit and the risk trade-off that you may have. So if you're a woman who's maybe at home, you're not out in the workplace, but you're working from home, you have very little exposure to people, so your risk of actually getting infected with COVID is extremely low. Out of an abundance of caution, you might decide not to go ahead with getting vaccinated at this particular time. Alternatively, you might be a woman who has more exposure and does have risk of potentially being exposed to COVID, and that discussion with your provider might lead to a conclusion that, really the benefit of being vaccinated is going to clearly outweigh any unknown, but very likely extremely low, if any, risk of getting vaccinated. So we can't give a recommendation that for an individual person, we can't provide a recommendation about what you specifically should do. But I think our information for you is there's no reason we think that we would believe that these vaccines would have any particular harm to a pregnant woman. But it really is a conversation for you to have with your provider about when you would receive that second dose in relation to what other exposures you have, and just what your own comfort level is about receiving the vaccine in the early phases of pregnancy.
Thank you, Kate, so much. Here is the next question coming from Julio, watching us on LinkedIn. People are getting concerned about various virus variants. So his question is whether Janssen vaccine is efficient equally to different variants that are currently circulating.
So this is a great question because we all are hearing about what are referred to as variants of concern. So it's a totally normal thing for viruses to change in their genetic makeup. Those are called mutations. Viruses do this all the time. So it's not news that there are variants. The only concern is whether any of those changes in the genetic makeup of a virus leads to the virus either being better able to transmit from one person to the next, or makes disease more severe in some way, or if those changes to a virus mean that either our treatments, our diagnostics, or our vaccines maybe don't work as well. So for this particular vaccine, there is some evidence around the efficacy of the vaccine against some of the variants, and there was demonstrated substantial efficacy. So this is an important product for having confidence that this product continues to have efficacy against the variants of concern. Now, we really only have information about some of the variants, not all of the variants. For instance, we don't have any information about the variant called P1 that initially was identified in Brazil, but is also spreading in a number of places around the world. So there is some information around the efficacy of this product against some of the other variants, but we don't have complete information for any product across all of the variants. But this one looks good with respect to the variants that we do have information for.
Thank you, Kate, so much. Here is the follow-up question from a Twitter viewer. Should we be getting booster shots for the variants? Can we boost vaccines with different variant targets?
Not for now. I think that for now, what we need to do clearly is to have the full doses of any of these vaccines, 2 for the ones that we have recommended, Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, and 1 for this one. What you need to see is whether there's a possibility of being reinfected with one of these variants after you have been vaccinated. And in that sense, what we have to do then is to make sure that people continue to follow the rules of social distancing, wearing a mask, washing your hands, and especially not doing anything that puts you at risk of being infected with any other viruses, and especially these variants. I think that is a special thing that people have to understand, that having a vaccine for now protects you, but it doesn't protect you from being in contact with other people and certainly becoming reinfected with these variants if you come in contact with them and your immunity is not protective in that sense. What we do feel is that countries should make sure that they have all the information about the circulation of these new variants. The sequences are there, the possibilities are there. So it's making a huge effort to get all that information and to work in a coordinated way to make sure that we understand the full extent of the spread of these variants, and also the impact that vaccination or the previous infection has on them in that sense. We feel that the more people vaccinated that we have, the easier it will be to be able to stop the virus from circulating, whether it's the original one or these new variants. I don't know if Kate would like to add something to that.
No, I think that's really complete. And I think it's also important for people to know and just remember that these vaccines and the response to the pandemic, we are continuing to learn about the vaccines, about the variants, about the virus itself really on an hourly by hourly basis and on a day by day basis. And we're going to update any recommendations that we have based on new evidence as it comes in and as it convinces our expert committees, like the one that Dr. Cravioto leads, when there's enough evidence to shift in any of the ways that we use the vaccines, we'll make that recommendation as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Thank you both so much. Here's the next question coming from our LinkedIn viewer. How long after being infected with coronavirus do you have to wait to get vaccinated?
Dr. O'Brien?
Well, what we really recommend in terms of if you've been infected already with COVID-2, there's a couple of things to consider. The first is that we know that for most people, there's a period of time after you've been infected where you have immunity against getting reinfected again. And so from an individual perspective, you might decide that if it's your turn to get vaccine and yet you've had COVID disease, you might decide from a sort of altruistic perspective to wait a little longer and let someone else go first before you because you already have relative protection. So we do provide in the recommendations that could be an individual choice to pause for a period of time. And the evidence says that and the evidence continues to grow, but the evidence says that you're protected around 6 months after your infection, perhaps up to 8 months, and we will continue to learn if the protection exists well beyond that. We don't want any vaccine program, though, to exclude people from getting vaccinated or to delay their vaccinations on the part of the fact that somebody has been diseased. So it really is about an individual decision, not a programmatic decision. We're also seeing some recent information that especially among the elderly, that intensity or duration of from natural infection might not be as strong as it is in people who are younger. So for elderly people, probably this idea of delaying vaccination is maybe go ahead and get vaccinated on time as is recommended. And the same is true about the variants, that we think that especially in settings where variants are quite prevalent, that going ahead and getting vaccinated on time is probably a good idea. So overall, what we're saying is go ahead and get vaccinated, even if you've had disease. Wait until you've had a bit of recovery period from your illness. So don't get vaccinated when you're acutely ill. But as soon as you're better from your illness, go ahead and get vaccinated. Although we do allow for this idea that some people might want to let sort of others go first if they've now recovered from COVID, at least for a 6-month period of time.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Here is a question from a Facebook viewer. A person having a history of allergy to penicillin, can the person proceed for vaccination or not, vaccination for COVID-19? So I know that Alejandro in some of the previous interviews has been explaining for people with allergies for which vaccines they should be careful. So maybe we can remind on which allergies we should pay attention to.
We have made it clear that anybody that has had an allergic reaction to another vaccine should not receive one of these ones because we don't know if there are any components to which that person has reacted that might be also present in these vaccines. In that sense, that was a recommendation we made specially for the two mRNA vaccines, the Pfizer and the Moderna, which we know has a much higher chance of having an allergic reaction than these other ones. In the case of any allergies to antibiotics, to food, to dust, to other issues, we do not feel that that's a contraindication to use any of these vaccines so far. And the use of them massively in certain countries and the follow-up of the adverse effects have shown that that is not one of the reasons why people should not be vaccinated. So in answer specifically to the person that made the question, I don't think that an allergy to penicillin is a contraindication to use any of the vaccines that we have recommended so far.
Yeah, so let me just reinforce what Alejandro is saying. If you are somebody who has allergies, so you have hay fever, you have seasonal allergies, you have allergies to foods, you have allergies to medicines, none of those are a reason not to get vaccinated. There are only very limited numbers of people, extremely limited numbers of people who should avoid getting one or another of these vaccines. And those are people who have a known allergy to something that's in these vaccines. And because these vaccines are new, and we do know what the components are of the vaccines, but there's a very, very limited number of people who would have any allergy to anything that is in these vaccines. So the vast majority, 99.99% of people are going to have no problem getting these vaccines and should go ahead, even if you're a person who has allergies to foods or to medicines like penicillin or other things like that. These are vaccines you can go ahead and get. If you have a reaction to your first dose of vaccine, now in Johnson & Johnson, it's only one dose, but for the other vaccines that are 2-dose vaccines, if you were to have an allergic reaction to your first dose of vaccine, that's a reason not to get the second dose. But other than that, there are really no reasons from an allergy perspective that you shouldn't get vaccinated.
Thank you so much. Here is a follow-up question from a Twitter user talking about people who were infected with COVID-19 and getting vaccinated. What, sorry, questions are scrolling too fast. What if you have recently, if someone was infected with COVID, will they have more side effects to the vaccine?
No, that hasn't been shown so far. People that have had the infection and that have been vaccinated have not been shown, compared to the ones that have not had the infection and get vaccinated, that they have more side effects or that they have more allergic reactions.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Here is the next question as well from a Twitter viewer. What if you have recently had another illness, not COVID-19? Should you get vaccinated?
Right, go ahead,
I think that in case, it depends very much what you had before. If you have had a flu infection or if you have had gastrointestinal infection, you should be really out of the problem completely before you go and have a vaccination. One, because you might get symptoms related to the problem you have that could be then made to seem to be happening because of the vaccine. So we decide to separate those two issues. So you should be in a relatively good state of health in general, especially of any other infection, before you take your vaccines. Now, however, some people who have hypertension, diabetes, who have other types of problems. At the time, of course, those are still either under control or not, but that's not a contraindication not to get vaccinated. It would only be if you have a very acute infection or have just recovered from one, you should wait at least for 7 to 14 days before you have a vaccine, so that there's no complication of the two things at the same time.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Here is the next question coming from a Facebook viewer. If you are on chemotherapy, can you be vaccinated?
I think that depends very much on the type of chemotherapy you're receiving and the status of your own immune system at the time that the vaccine is given. Those people should have the advice of the people who are treating them before or they get the vaccine or not. That is something very individual in that sense. If you have had a long-term problem of this and you are in the phase of recovery or it's under control, then there's no problem about getting a vaccine. But if you're in the early phases and you're still receiving any drug that decreases your immune response to anything, then you should be very careful about that. And it has to be under the advice of the person who's giving you the treatment and knows about the disease and the complications of either using or not a vaccine at the time. In that sense, there's no general recommendation, except if you have been on the treatment and you have already passed the acute phase of any type of immunosuppressive system in that sense. And that goes the same for the people who are HIV positive. If they are under control with the drugs that are now so widely available, then there's no reason to take the vaccine, although the response to the vaccine might be less than other people who are not HIV infected, but there's no contraindication not to use it in them. If you are not on the treatment, then you have to talk to your health provider to see when they recommend for you to take these vaccines.
Thank you, Alejandro. Thank you very much. Here's the next question, again, for the vaccines that require 2 doses. If the second dose is delayed, what is the efficacy of the first dose?
So maybe I can take that one. For the 2-dose regimen, so we have the Pfizer product, Moderna, the AstraZeneca product. Those are the 3 that WHO has reviewed the data of. And now we have this 1-dose product. So the question is, if you get your first dose of these 2-dose regimens, do you have any protection after getting the first dose? And the answer is yes. We have a growing body of evidence that demonstrates that even after the first dose, although it does take some time, it doesn't happen immediately in the day after you've been vaccinated. But when you look at 14 days after the first dose, that there is substantial efficacy from some of these products. For some of them, and the data from different studies say some different things, but for some of them, we're seeing anywhere from about 60% protection upwards of up to about 90% protection. So we very much recommend that you go ahead and get your second dose of vaccine to complete the regimen that you've had. But we're seeing really substantial amounts of protection even after that first dose, which is really great news, because in a limited supply situation, that's why one of the recommendations in some countries is to use the supply to give first doses to as many people as possible and use incoming supply afterwards to give the second dose.
Thank you, Kate. Here is a question from a Twitter viewer. If a person had an allergic reaction to a Moderna vaccine, can she get Janssen vaccine as a second dose?
That's a really specific question. I think that needs to be really assessed with your physician. What's in the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and what's in the Moderna vaccine, it might be quite difficult to know what the allergic reaction was. And then certainly also assessing what the risk of that for that person is of getting coronavirus disease. So that's really a pretty tailored question that would really need to be assessed by the person's physician for his or her particular situation.
Thank you. We are receiving several questions and comments about AstraZeneca vaccine, and people are sharing their concerns over the news reports and some governments in Europe as a precautionary measure temporarily pausing the vaccinations. So can you, Kate, please share what is WHO doing about it and what is WHO position?
Absolutely. So WHO works very closely with the regulators around the world to evaluate the safety. First of all, to monitor reports that are coming in on potential safety issues. And remember, anybody at any time can report an issue, whether it's related or not related to a vaccine. We will include in the evaluation of safety any reports that come in. Also remember that things happen to people whether they are vaccinated or not. There are lots of illnesses that happen to people. Some of them are common, some of them are very rare. By coincidence, those things that are otherwise going to happen sometimes are going to happen in relation to having received a vaccine, even if it's not caused by the vaccine. So for example, if you go and get vaccinated and 2 days later you're in a car accident, those two things happened in time relation to each other, but one is not caused by the other. For medical events, we do want to look at all of those events that occur after a vaccination because we want to distinguish whether or not they were related to receiving the vaccine or not. So WHO has a safety committee. We look at all of the safety reports that come in. We are co-reviewing with the European medicines agencies on this signal that has come up around clotting events and low platelet counts in people in relation to when they received the vaccine. At this point, that review is ongoing. We do expect that there will be some press statements from EMA and then from WHO and other regulators. We are continuing to, the view of the data at this point is that there is the benefit and the risk ratio continues to support very much the use of the vaccine. And I want to remind all of the viewers that these safety reports that are coming in, regardless of whether they turn out to be potentially related to the vaccine or not, are extremely rare events. We're talking about millions of doses, in fact, 17 million doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine and more that have been distributed around the world. In Europe, in the UK, in India, in other countries around the world now. And there are a handful of cases of these bleeding events and clotting events, some of which are very serious, some of which have resulted in very serious outcomes. But regardless of whether or not they are or are not related to the vaccine, these are extremely rare events. And I think that's an important point. We do have other vaccines where there are rare side effects, and these are recognized side effects that are part of the nature of the vaccine, and yet the benefit of the vaccine by preventing serious disease, death, and hospitalizations from these illnesses are much more common. And so that benefit-risk trade-off is really important. I'll give you the car analogy again. Every time each of us gets in a car, there is a risk, albeit small, that we'll be in a car accident and a car accident. And yet we recognize that carrying out our daily lives, we are not 100% protected against something negative happening to us. So we will look at all of the data. We will share the information publicly. We will make the best assessment of that benefit risk. And if there are specific risks related to any one of these vaccines, that will become part of the information about the vaccine and the labeling of the vaccine. Once that safety information is available, then the committee that Dr. Cravioto chairs, the Expert Advisory Committee on Vaccines and Immunization, will make a recommendation to WHO about how to use the vaccine and how to minimize any of the risks that have been identified. So at this point, we are continuing to recommend the use of the vaccine without change in those recommendations that we've previously made.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you so much for clarifying this. It's very important for our viewers to have a clear information and understand what is going on and how we are reviewing such events. A few more questions before we end. One is there a vaccine that is recommended for immune suppressed people?
I would say that any of the vaccines that we have recommended so far can be used in immunosuppressed people. The response might not be as good, and that's why I was saying that they should be used under the supervision of their health providers. But there's no contraindication of using them in any of the immunosuppressed situations.
Thank you, Alejandro. A LinkedIn viewer is saying AstraZeneca vaccine is known to have a little reduced efficacy in the body than Pfizer and Moderna. How high is the Janssen vaccine efficacy in comparison?
Go ahead, Doctor. Well, I'll start there. We don't make comparisons of that type among vaccines. Each one of the vaccines has been seen separately in their capacity to do one basic thing, which is to protect people from severe disease, from hospitalization, and from dying. That is as far as we have gone. That is essential for the control of the pandemic. Whether one vaccine in the end is going to be more efficacious or the duration of the protection given by any of these products is longer is something that we still need to determine, because we're using the vaccines at a very early stage in that sense. What we do say that if you're offered any of these vaccines that have been shown to be safe and that have enough efficacy to be able to stop you from having a severe disease, being in a hospital or dying, then you should go ahead and take it. There's no reason to compare them because they're not the same product. They don't behave in the same way, except to develop the immunity against the virus that is causing the problem. So it wouldn't be fair even to compare them in that sense. What we do feel is that as they come along, and we will continue to look at vaccines in SAGE that have received an EUL approval either by WHO or one of the stringent regulatory authorities, as we call them, then we will have a much wider amount of products that can be used worldwide for the protection of the people. So in that sense, the recommendation is to use any vaccine that is offered to you that has gone through the process of reviewing its safety first, and then that it has enough efficacy for you to be able to stop being really sick. I don't know if Kate would like to add anything.
Yeah, we get asked this question a lot, what's the best vaccine for me to get? And our answer is any vaccine that you're offered. These are life-saving vaccines. They're really important. It's really important to prioritize those people who need them the most, and to wait our turn to be vaccinated when there's enough supply for whenever it's our turn to be vaccinated. These are vaccines that are in short supply from a worldwide perspective. And so the best vaccine to get is the one that you're offered.
Thank you, Kate. And before we close, you mentioned that shortage of doses that we are facing globally, and we have the COVAX facility that started delivering doses. So maybe you can just give the update on how many doses have been sent to how many countries before we close.
Yeah, happy to do that. We're really excited that vaccines have started to come out in countries delivered by COVAX. And as of today, there are 30 million doses that have been delivered through the COVAX facility in 51 different countries. And those doses are going to increase, and the number of countries that are getting vaccine will increase. Our aim is to make sure that every country around the world that is ready to deploy vaccine has supply of vaccine and has started vaccinating their healthcare workers by the beginning of April. So we're zeroing in on that target and doing everything possible to assure that shipments are going out and countries are receiving vaccine. So over 51 countries now receiving vaccine through COVAX, over 30 million doses with millions more to come.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Alejandro, for your time, for answering our viewers' questions. And I thank everyone watching us. I will list some of the countries. The list is very long. Kenya, Jamaica, Bangladesh, Germany, Haiti, Sudan, Nigeria, Albania, India, Pakistan, the US, Switzerland, Greece, Canada, Brazil, Liberia, Cameroon, Uganda, Saudi Arabia, Senegal, Afghanistan, Spain, and many others. As Kate mentioned, we are calling for vaccine equity as we don't have enough doses at the moment for everyone. So our Director General at the beginning of 2021 has called on all of us and all countries to work together to ensure that we have vaccination on the way in all countries in first 100 days of 2021. We have 23 days left to act, and obviously to give the priority, as Kate and Alejandro mentioned, to health workers, frontline workers of this pandemic, and those populations that are at highest risk of severe disease. So if you want to learn more about our call to vaccine equity, please visit our website, who.int/vaccine equity with 1E, or join our call and conversation on Twitter and other social media by using the hashtag vaccine equity. Please stay with us, follow our social media posts, our website with information, and we will be back with you soon when we have more news to share. Thank you, and until then, stay safe.
Thank you.